Amid a coronavirus epidemic, state and local governments across the country are shoveling money out the door. Guess who the recipients are? Illegal aliens. Here to tell us more, Shari Rendall, FAIR's State and Local Engagement Director. And I'm Dan Stein, President of FAIR. Shari, what's going on?
Well, thanks, Dan. We're seeing, obviously, California, which has given money to illegal aliens. We have mentioned that before. Governor Newsom using $75 million of taxpayer funding. But California is just the biggest state so far. We also have Oregon, which has set up a fund of about $10 million to be used to create a wage replacement for illegal aliens to access. And it's supposed to help about 15,000 illegal aliens. In Washington State, we've seen the Department of Social and Health Services open up coronavirus funding for illegal aliens as well. So we're starting to see some of those more liberal open border states fund illegal aliens during this time. And we're starting to see some states consider it. In Massachusetts, there's been legislation that's been introduced, and that will go even beyond California. It's set to match those federal stimulus payments, $1,200 per adult and $500 per children.
Aren't these states that are in financial trouble? Aren't these states that are actually having difficulty paying their bills? Aren't they borrowing money from the federal government?
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the states we're looking at, Connecticut, has had major problems with funding, and they're looking at possibly giving funding to illegal aliens. So we are seeing states that are in financial trouble that don't have reserves for their unemployment benefits, with unemployment skyrocketing. And in fact, Massachusetts has 650,000 unemployed citizens and legal residents up in that state.
I mean, wouldn't this be a good time for them to start encouraging people here illegally to maybe go back to their home countries? Wouldn't it make sense to be reserving our scarce resources for citizens, many of whom are struggling to make ends meet? What is the moral basis behind, what is this argument that somehow we can't do our own work, that illegal aliens are somehow essential, even if they're being laid off and they're not working? What's the argument?
Well, that's just it. They're saying that they're here and they're suffering and they deserve it, and that they're a part of the fabric in those societies. And you see this in those states, but yet thousands and thousands of citizens and legal aliens are not getting the resources they need. In fact, we saw a recent one where veterans aren't getting the resources they need. And in one facility, I can't remember where it was, you had veterans dying because they weren't getting the services. And yet we're shoveling money at illegal aliens who shouldn't even be here.
I mean, this is mostly a partisan breakdown, right? It's mostly the Democrat-controlled jurisdictions that are taking this cavalier attitude, apparently providing what seem to be extraordinary public benefits. Certainly in Montgomery County, Maryland, the county council is working overtime trying to deliver benefits to illegal aliens, cash assistance, stimulus money, aid to businesses that they may work in or own. Very low priority for American citizens comparatively. I mean, the moral basis for this is very unclear, and you would think that this would be a little bit more controversial. The fact is, if people are here illegally, they don't really have any claim to any federal money, any money that the United States has. They came here jumping in front of the line of millions of people who waited patiently to come here. Respect for law is a cornerstone of citizenship. And frankly, anybody taking a look at what's happening in detention centers around the country can see, or even in meatpacking plants, that there's a strong correlation in many cases between illegal immigration and the coronavirus epidemic. Why is that? Because people working here illegally often work in crowded conditions, improper social distancing. Maybe employers are taking advantage of that fact and not properly protecting them. Whatever the factors are, employees need to have the bargaining leverage to protect themselves. And continuing to promote, reward, encourage illegal immigration, which is what we now see from the Democratic-controlled jurisdictions, is making it harder to fight this pandemic and frankly impeding general progress. So what do folks need to do?
Well, I would suggest that they make their voices heard. They need to be contacting their legislators, the governors, and making sure that they know that they need to put their citizens and legal residents first. That is the priority. They need to be told. And while everybody is struggling, we need to prioritize resources in a way that furthers American policy.
Yeah, well, now Congress did try to do this, Republican-led Congress in the Senate pushed to say that if you had a spouse who was working illegally without a Social Security number, you were ineligible for the stimulus money. Of course, the ACLU and others have brought lawsuits. Everything apparently gets litigated in court now. It's a substitute for the legislature and the people's right to make decisions through their democratically elected officials. But Congress, in its wisdom, basically said, look, this is a time of extraordinary crisis, and we need to be using resources carefully. This money is borrowed money. I mean, California, as I mentioned earlier, these are states that are in extraordinary financial trouble, and yet and borrowing federal money, they're essentially fiscally insolvent, and yet they're still providing benefits to illegal aliens, frankly, at the expense of citizens. So people do need to make their voices heard, and where can they go and get more information?
Well, FAIR website is up, and we are also sending out alerts to states where there is possibility of legislation moving. We just sent an alert out to our folks in Massachusetts. They need to make sure they contact their legislators. They need to go to the FAIR website and see. We will update our timeline to show what actions are being taken. So FAIR is out in front fighting for Americans, and we want to know where you're in our thoughts during this difficult time. And if they need anything, they can reach out to our field staff. Susan Tully, Joyce Mucci, and Jonathan Hannon are all, feet on the ground, ready to help. And so we're just looking to make people aware, because a lot of times it's hard to find this funding, and it's buried deep in emergency funding. It's not being publicized. It's not, easily accessible.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess there's also a lot of money coming from the Open Society Institute, right? And George Soros's funding is providing additional incentives, funneling money through nonprofits, they have direct cash assistance they're providing, as well as encouraging a lot of these governments with which they're aligned to provide this assistance, right?
That's absolutely true. We saw, I believe it was the National Immigration Law Center is putting out a PDF on a blueprint on how to get help for illegal immigrants. And it talks about testing, it talks about state funding. I mean, they're looking at every possible avenue to push their agenda. And we just need to make sure that our members know what's going on and that they're fighting these efforts.
All right, that's great work. Okay, Shari, thanks for joining me. We'll come back to you more with the workshop at FAIR. Thanks for participating and being active, and we will all talk to you soon.